Hey guys, Brockshield here. This time, as you can see, entering Orgrimmar. Why, you may ask? Most of you already have seen from the title. We will be heading to Ragefire Chasm. So, would I recommend Ragefire Chasm in any way, shape, or form as an Alliance player? No. And in general, I don't think I could recommend Ragefire Chasm even if Horde Paladins were in the game, or for Horde Mages, for example. Ragefire Chasm, unfortunately, is not a great dungeon for this power level style of pulling. And there are a few reasons, which we'll see in the video here. So, fortunately, so far, I've been able to avoid the guards, as when you have your epic mount and your level 60 mount, these guards usually can't get you. But there you see the 60 elite with the special name Scout Thar. He gets me in his net. And then this nice orc player here gasps at me, Grakul. So I'm not worried about it yet, as a paladin you have so many resources for escaping. I'm trying to use Blessing of Freedom. Unfortunately, I keep getting dazed, so there's no way around that. Unless you bubble, of course. And with that, time to enter Ragefire Chasm. So here we are, about to start the pull, and what I would recommend this dungeon for is for beginning players to practice AoE style power pulling. And I do believe it's important because while in my gear update video, as you'll see in the future, I focus on why this spell power is so important in dealing damage, etc., getting back to the basics of what power pulling is all about goes hand in hand with not killing the mobs too quickly. So here I want to key you guys in on a few things. Yes, you see that Devotion aura is up instead of Retribution aura. I also want to key you guys in on the shield I'm wearing. I'm not wearing my Skullflame shield or the Force Reactive Disc. In fact, I'm just wearing a green shield of level 50. The reason is because, with the current armor set I'm using, no items I have inherently do any reflect damage, which is essential right now because these mobs would all go down if I wore a Skullflame shield. One proc from the shield would do massive damage, and the lifesteal alone might destroy the mobs over the course of the run. If you had a party with you, yes, they would get experience, but the loot would probably have disappeared in Ragefire Chasm by the time I would have been able to return to where they fell. Okay, in addition to that, the importance of using Devotion aura is also essential. So you don't want to be doing retribution damage over the course of the runs when the mobs are of such low level. In the higher level dungeons, of course, like SM, ZF, any of those dungeons around that level, Moradon, etc., you're gonna need Retribution aura because every bit of damage adds up. In this level range, you're going to want to avoid it because you'll bring down the mobs too quickly. Your Consecration, even as a beginning level Paladin with the 48 tick each tick, is more than enough for these mobs. So it's important to remember the fundamentals that you're not trying to bring them down before you have them all rounded up. You notice here, instead of choosing Blessing of Kings like some other Paladins do in these runs, I stick with Blessing of Sanctuary. The reason is because, since I'm using zero other reflect damage in any way, shape, or form, the few blocks I get as I run forward through the mobs in situations like this right here, which would be the only times I would block since I'm ahead of the mobs, is not enough by itself to bring down any of the mobs over the course of the run. And the huge benefit you get from Blessing of Sanctuary is that each time you hit, it has a chance of reducing the damage by up to 24. So you'll see later in this run, I will have to heal. It's not like you round up 100 of these mobs and they don't do anything to you. They're going to hit you for something. This isn't like it's Burning Crusade running this, or rather the Lich King, right? Like now it's just a joke. But at this point, while they can't bring you down in these level of packs, if you just let them tee off on you without Blessing of Sanctuary, by now, and I have tested it, by now I would have been about half health after that heal. So they would have brought me close to dying if I didn't have Blessing of Sanctuary. For that reason, the basics of Paladin power pulling involve rounding up the mobs without bringing them down too quickly if they're too low level, as well as balancing that reflect damage with what the needs of the dungeon are. In addition to that, utilizing dungeon mechanics, like what you see up here, is really important. You saw me jump over that ledge for the quick heal earlier. I'm going to do something very similar here. There are rock elementals up top as you head to this path on the right. You would never get them in a regular dungeon run if you were a Horde player, or if you were an adventurous Alliance player heading over to RFC for leveling. But here, you can see that this ledge is essential for me in terms of regaining more health. At this point, with the whole dungeon on me at this point, I am taking damage. And up here, you'll see why I say Ragefire Chasm is not a good dungeon. Because any dungeon with mobs that stun you or slow you is very difficult if it can't be cleansed off for the slows, and the stuns, no character is immune to them. So here you can see, as we head up here, I'm going to start getting shield slammed, and that is going to put an end to the idea of one pulling Ragefire Chasm. I was thinking to myself, would it be possible if I used a swiftness potion around this area here once they started stunning me? But I realized that that isn't really worth it, because there are just too many packs for one swiftness potion to guarantee me that I'll get through all of them. And once a single chain stun begins, as you see here, there's no way to escape them permanently as a guarantee moving forwards. So the issue is that this mob also here, Taragaman, he does a nice knock into the air. So now you'll see that I realize there's no way to continue pushing forwards. I'm going to go ahead, bubble, heal myself up, and bring these mobs down. While the time is relatively low for all of these mobs, I mean it's only 5 minutes and almost the whole dungeon is on me, it's still the fact that the stuns make the run inefficient. And that's the exact same thing that happens with stockades. And it's why I say, while this dungeon is a very aesthetically beautiful dungeon unlike the stockades, Shadowfang Keep is the best power leveling dungeon pound for pound in World of Warcraft. There's only one mob in that dungeon that stuns. It's the commander with his Hammer of Justice, the one that us paladins have, as he's a paladin. And that there are no mobs that slow you, and there's nothing else to hinder your progress. So when I eventually show Shadowfang Keep, remember how annoying these stuns were here, because we'll experience none of that in SFK. The one benefit RFC has is none of these mobs path back. Any dungeon where the mobs path back, you might as well just forget it with Paladin power pulling. It's not worth it, it's not efficient, and there's very little to gain in terms of power leveling, because if your party has to come up, they aggro the mobs, and next thing you know, you're fighting one mob at a time, which is just not the strength of a paladin. Ret paladins aside, please forgive me, Ret paladins. Single target is not the strength of us AoE paladins, I should say. With that said, with this style of pulling, we have cleared all of the dungeon up to this point, with the loot being done in approximately 7.5 minutes. Another reason, unfortunately, this dungeon isn't great is the loot just isn't worth much. And arguably, the loot is worth less than the repair bill. If the items like the cloth and the gems are not very profitable on your server, especially if, like for Bloodsealed Buccaneers, disenchanting is not profitable, at the lower levels at least, I could be losing gold on these runs, which is another reason why the runs aren't profitable. At least the difference here between stockades as well is you'll get a full inventory of loot after just one run, which would be terrible if you're an Alliance player looking for loot, and great if you're a Horde player, because it's just one run, go ahead, zone out, vendor everything, etc., zone back in. With that said, I do enjoy aesthetically Ragefire Chasm. I was hoping from the sword from Taragaman. Unfortunately, it didn't drop, but still a beautiful dungeon nevertheless. As we head up here, we will continue to get shield slammed, unfortunately, but there are no other gimmicky mechanics at this level of any concern, because you're so much higher level than the mobs. If I was a Horde Paladin in Burning Crusade, or another Alliance Paladin around level 40, I would say Ragefire Chasm is a great way for you to practice your AoE style pulling. A lot of Alliance players go to Dead Mines to practice when they're a mid-level range Paladin. I don't recommend Dead Mines, as when I show that video in the future, you guys will remember just how many forced stopping points there are for you in Dead Mines. Whether it's the cannon that has to open, or the boss where you're unable to, you're unable to get through until you defeat him. One of the doors with the goblin boss. There are a lot of stops for you in that dungeon that are just different than a dungeon like this or a dungeon like Stockades. So here we go. We're going to head up this last path up here. And as you'll see, the mobs stun me and make the pull so much slower. Even after that last pull, I somehow have time to bubble again. And for me, when I can bubble twice in a row like that, I feel inefficient as a paladin, because you want to use Blessing of Protection as a paladin. You want to utilize that cooldown to feel like the run is efficient. Otherwise, if you're just using Divine Shield, it's like, man, how quickly am I really able to bring these mobs down? So we're finishing up here with the same strategy being used. Your Devotion Aura, no reflect damage at all because these mobs will go down. And Blessing of Sanctuary because they're teeing off on me. And I mean, at this point, I'm in some of the best gear you can have in Phase 4 of Classic WoW. You're not going to get better than BWL Tier 2 for this style of pulling throughout the whole of entirety of Classic WoW. And they still hit, so there's no way you can just be like, oh, they don't do damage to you. They do damage to you. And it'll only be worse for other classes who aren't plate wearers, unfortunately. So you want to have damage mitigation, but not reflection when you enter these lower level dungeons. And so here it is, going to pop the Talisman of Ephemeral Power, consecrate away, and get the healing in place. You see I wait for those last mobs just because these mobs will be finished off very quickly. Within a matter of 2 consecrates, they'll be down. What I like about this style of pulling is it's very enjoyable for me. No matter how many times I've done a run in SMCath or Stockades, somehow I still enjoy the AoE, which is nice because you always want to have fun when you're playing a game, right? You don't want it to feel like a grind, and that's something I'm grateful for, as it hasn't been. As we wrap up the video, I hope you've enjoyed watching Ragefire Chasm from the Paladin point of view. I want to say thank you all very much. Light be with you, and take care. Thanks again.